All right, so let's jump right into this. We've got some intrigue in Canadian politics to unpack today. Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland resigned pretty suddenly, and now Dominic LeBlanc's stepping in. He's going to be taking on that
All
role.
stepping up.
It seems like he's not just like filling a vacancy. He's known as Trudeau's fixer. And that's kind of what we're going to try to figure out. Like, what does that actually mean in practice?
You've got a whole stack of articles and notes here,
Yeah.
all focusing on LeBlanc's career. And the thing that you see over and over is that he gets called on to handle the tough situations, kind of like a political firefighter or something like that.
Yeah, a troubleshooter almost. Like, some of these examples are pretty wild.
Yeah.
He took over public safety after the Freedom Convoy protests, which really shook things up in Canada, with those blockades and all that debate about the pandemic mandates and everything.
Controversy.
And there was that time he went to meet with Trump during the trade negotiations. That whole thing felt like it was just going to completely fall apart at any minute.
Oh, absolutely.
And now, finance minister. During this crisis, I mean, what does that say about the kind of trust that he has within the Liberal Party?
Well, it says a lot. I mean,
Yeah.
it suggests that he's seen as somebody who can handle these really complex situations. Like, a lot of these are very emotionally charged as well, and he can navigate those and somehow find a way to find a solution. But it also says something about his ability to communicate.
Yeah.
And to kind of build bridges, which is essential when you're playing this kind of fixer role. Because think about it. It's not just about putting out fires. You're dealing with different interests that are clashing and really strong personalities.
Yeah.
And everyone's looking for you to present this unified front.
Right, so it's not just about being a yes man. I mean, in fact, a lot of these sources are highlighting that. LeBlanc is actually respected for his political instincts and how well he connects with people. I mean, Scott Sims, he's a former Liberal MP. He even called him a natural when it comes to communication. So is that rare in politics?
You'd be surprised.
Yeah.
I mean, being able to really communicate clearly, especially when you're in a crisis, is a really, really valuable skill. It's not just about, being likable.
Yeah.
It's about actually being able to build trust and, conveying a sense that you are competent.
Yeah.
And that you've got things under control, even when it feels like everything's kind of falling apart around you.
Right, when things are uncertain. So we're seeing this interesting mix of toughness, but also charisma. And then on top of all of that, his background. I mean, he comes from a real political dynasty. His dad was a big name in the Liberal Party back in Pierre Trudeau's time.
Yeah, back in the day.
Yes.
That's right. And I think that kind of upbringing probably gave him a really deep sense of loyalty to the party and a real commitment to the Liberal Party. But it also suggests that, he was exposed to all the kind of inside stuff of politics from a really young age. He's not just a politician. He's practically a product of the Liberal Party.
Right, like he grew up with it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then you layer on top of all of that his personal experiences. He's had 2 battles with cancer. So talk about resilience. I mean, does that kind of experience shape someone's approach to politics, do you think?
Well, I think facing challenges like that definitely shapes how you look at things and what your priorities are. It probably gave him a really deep understanding of resilience and determination, which are, potentially valuable traits if you're leading a country. But then the question is, how does that translate into actual leadership decisions? Like, could it make him more risk averse?
Yeah.
Or maybe more empathetic to certain policy issues?
Right. That's a good point. I mean, it's easy to just see that label of fixer and focus on all the political maneuvering, but, there's this whole personal history there that's probably influencing how he approaches things. And speaking of leadership, LeBlanc's name has been thrown around a lot as a potential successor to Trudeau.
Oh, yeah. He's definitely on the list.
Yes.
That's right. And some of the sources we've got here, including people who've worked with him, seem to think he's got what it takes. Like, for example, Sims said that LeBlanc would be at the top of the heap if he decided to actually run for leadership. And then former New Brunswick Premier Brian Gallant described him as affable, but also gritty. But
you have to be careful. Because sometimes people's admiration for someone can cloud their judgment, but whether that person would actually be a good leader.
Right. Yeah, it's not the same thing. Like, being a good fixer doesn't necessarily mean you'd automatically be a good leader. So let's break that down a little bit.
Yeah.
What are we seeing in these sources about his strengths and weaknesses as a potential leader?
Well, one strength that really stands out is his ability to navigate these really complex situations and bring people together. He's often described as a pragmatist, someone who can find common ground, even when people really disagree strongly.
Yeah, like those sources. That meeting with Trump is a prime example.
Yeah.
Those trade negotiations were so tense.
Yeah.
And it really felt like things could blow up at any second.
Yeah.
Exactly. And while we obviously don't know everything that went on in those discussions, it seems like LeBlanc played a key role in kind of calming things down and finding a way forward. It wasn't just about, representing Canada's interests. It was also about understanding what the other side wanted
Right.
and finding areas where they could actually compromise. I mean, that ability to bridge, divide, it could be really valuable these days.
Yeah.
In this increasingly polarized political climate.
For sure. Yeah, it seems like that kind of approach is in high demand right now. But the sources also suggest that's this pragmatism could be a double-edged sword. Some commentators are worried that it might come across as a lack of a clear vision or, strong convictions.
That's a valid point.
Right.
Well, flexibility and being able to compromise are important. A leader also needs to be able to articulate, a really compelling vision of what they want for the future. They need to be able to inspire people and give them a sense of where things are headed. And that's something LeBlanc would need to be able to demonstrate if he wants to convince Canadians that he's the right person to lead the country.
So it's not just about fixing problems. It's also about setting a course for the future. And then, of course, there's the fact that he'd be stepping into some pretty big shoes if he were to become Liberal leader.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Absolutely. I mean, Trudeau, despite all the controversies, has a certain charisma and kind of star power.
Yeah.
That's hard to match. LeBlanc would have to find his own way to really connect with voters on that national level.
Yeah, he'd have to make his own mark.
Right.
And he'd also be taking over a party that's been in power for a while now, so there's probably going to be some fatigue among voters, maybe even some disillusionment. So could LeBlanc overcome that? Or would he just be carrying too much baggage from the previous administration?
That's a big challenge for anyone who takes over. I mean, they have to convince Canadians that they represent a real change, a fresh start. But at the same time, they have to maintain those core values.
Yeah.
And principles of the party.
Yeah.
It's a really tricky balance to strike.
Yeah, for sure. And it's not like he'd have a lot of time to figure it all out. I mean, the next election is right around the corner. And the political landscape is, let's just say it's a bit turbulent right now.
Yeah, things are a bit shaky. So, absolutely. I mean, the Conservatives are just waiting to pounce on any sign of weakness.
Yeah.
And who knows what other political forces might emerge in the next few months. It's a really dynamic situation.
Yeah.
And you just can't predict what's going to happen. Whoever leads the Liberals into the next election has got to be ready for anything.
That's for sure. And speaking of challenges, let's bring it back to right now. LeBlanc has just become the finance minister after Freeland's resignation.
Right. Stepping into the hot seat.
Yeah.
It's a huge role, especially considering what's happening in the economy right now. I mean, the global economy is facing so much uncertainty. Inflation is still a big concern. And the government's got to make some really tough decisions about how to transition to a more sustainable economy. And all of this is happening while there's all this drama going on within the party itself. I mean, sources are even suggesting that Freeland's departure could be a sign of some instability within the Liberal ranks.
So it's not just that it's a tough role, but he's also inheriting a situation that's already pretty tense. That whole fixer image is really starting to feel appropriate.
Yeah, he's going to have his work cut out for him.
For sure.
It's a real high-stakes test for him, how he does as finance minister. It's probably going to have a big impact on his future, both within the party and, on the national stage as well.
Right. It's almost like a trial run for a potential leadership bid. Like, if he can pull this off, if he can navigate all of this, it would really boost his credibility and show that he can handle the pressure. But if things go badly, it could really hurt his reputation and damage his chances of becoming leader.
Absolutely. It's a really interesting situation to watch. And I think it's important to remember that while we're focusing on all this political stuff and his potential leadership ambitions, there's also a personal side to this.
Right. You're talking about his battles with cancer again. Do you think that experience will shape how he approaches this new role?
It's hard to say for sure, but it's definitely part of his story. Facing those kinds of serious health challenges, it really changes how you look at things and what you think is important. It can make you a lot more aware of how fragile life is and how important it is to make a difference.
Right.
And it probably gives you a different understanding of what it means to be resilient and to keep going when things are tough. You face something really scary and come out the other side.
Yeah, you've been through the fire.
Exactly. And that experience might affect how he handles pressure, how he makes decisions, how he interacts with his colleagues and the public. It reminds us that behind all the political stuff, there's a real person with their own unique experiences. that shape how they see the world.
That's a really interesting thought. And it makes me wonder, what else is there to learn about LeBlanc? We've talked about his skills as a fixer
Yeah.
and his political instincts and his potential as a leader and his personal resilience. But what about his actual policy position?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
I mean, he's been in politics for a long time, but he hasn't really been the kind of person to push for specific policy agendas. He's more known for the work he does behind the scenes, negotiating and building consensus.
Right. So it's almost like we're trying to figure out what his political philosophy is based on his actions, rather than what he says.
Exactly. And that makes it both tricky and really interesting. We can look at his track record, and we can see that he tends to be very pragmatic. He focuses on finding things that work, rather than sticking to an ideology. But to really understand where he stands on certain issues, we're probably going to have to wait and see how he handles himself as finance minister.
Right. Actions speak louder than words, especially in politics. So what should we be looking for as he takes on this new role as finance minister? What are the clues that might tell us more about his political philosophy?
Well, the budget's going to be a big one. How he decides to spend money, the kinds of tax policies he comes up with, and how he deals with things like inflation and the cost of living. All of that will give us a much better sense of what his economic vision is.
Right. Okay, and then beyond the budget, just how he responds to all the different crises and challenges that are bound to come up. I mean, does he just follow the Liberal playbook? Or does he try to do something new? Does he want the government to be more hands-on? Or is he more into those market-based solutions? These are the kinds of things that will help us understand what he really believes in and what kind of leader he might be.
Yeah, those are the key questions.
It's almost like we're watching a real-time case study in political leadership.
Exactly. And it reminds us that being a good leader isn't just about having good ideas. It's also about being able to make those ideas happen, to deal with all the complexities, to build relationships, and to communicate effectively. All the things we've been talking about today.
Right. All those skills are essential. So this brings us back to that question of whether LeBlanc could be the future of the Liberal Party based on everything we've learned. What do you think?
Well, he definitely has a lot of the qualities you'd want in a leader. He's got the experience. He's respected within the party. And he's proven that he can get things done. And he also seems to be really good at connecting with people and building consensus, which is so important these days with all the division in politics.
Yeah, bridging those divides is crucial. But we've also talked about some of the challenges he might face. Like, he's not as well known across the country as some of the other people who might run for leader. And he needs to show people what his vision for the future is if he really wants to get them excited. Plus, there's that whole question of whether he can escape the baggage of a party that's been in power for so long. A lot of voters might be ready for a change.
Absolutely. Those are all valid concerns. So I think it's too soon to say whether he's going to be the next Liberal leader. A lot depends on how he does as finance minister and how the political landscape changes. And, of course, whether he even decides to run.
So many factors at play. Well, I guess one thing's for sure. Canadian politics are never boring.
Never a dull moment. And that's what makes these deep dives so interesting. Hopefully this one has given you a better understanding of Dominic LeBlanc, who he is and what he's all about. And hopefully you'll be able to follow this story with a more informed and critical perspective.
Absolutely. We've explored LeBlanc's career, his strengths and his potential as a leader, the challenges he's up against, and what his appointment might tell us about the Liberal Party. But now we want to leave you with one final question to think about. Was LeBlanc's appointment as finance minister just a strategic move by Trudeau to try and hold the party together when it seems like things might be falling apart? Or does Trudeau genuinely believe that LeBlanc is the best person for the job, and maybe even a future leader of the party? That's something for you to consider as we continue to watch this story unfold. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.